What is up, freaks? It's your boy Marty Bent here to introduce this week's episode of Tales from the Crypt. I did a terrible job of introducing my guest when we hit record, so I'm going to do a better job here. I sat down with Dave Collum, professor of organic chemistry from Cornell University, but he's much more than that. I've been following him on Twitter for quite some time now, most acutely for his views on finance, but he's got views outside of the world of chemistry and finance, and in my opinion, is an example of a critical thinker that we need more of in the world today. So I was very happy to be able to sit down with Dave over the computer last Friday and go over his 2019 year in review before it dropped. I had not read anything before we had this conversation, so it is pretty raw. And I did read his year in review over the weekend. I highly recommend you freaks go do that if you have not already. If you have done so already, don't worry. This podcast touches on a few other topics as well as Bitcoin and approaches the subjects in some different fashions as well. So it's definitely worth listening to. Dave, again, is somebody who I think is one of the best thinkers I've encountered on the internet in the recent years. And I want to read this tweet that he dropped in July of this year before we jump into this episode, because again, we talk about some taboo subjects that are going to trigger some people. All right, here's the tweet. I am a conspiracy theorist. I believe men and women of wealth and power conspire. If you don't think so, then you are what is called an idiot. If you believe stuff but fear the label, you are what is called a coward. I think that's a very powerful statement, and that's basically the vibe of this episode. So I hope you freaks enjoy it. We do talk about Bitcoin. Dave is a gold bug and Bitcoin skeptic, but I think we had a good conversation about the subject. This episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by Cash App. As you know, Cash App is the simplest way to send and save money, and now it's the simplest way to try to grow your money. Introducing Cash App investing. You guys already know that you can stack sats on the Cash App. You can buy Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin, send it, receive it, do all that good stuff with Bitcoin. Now you can start stacking slivers of shares too. Unlike investing tools that only let you buy entire shares of stock, Cash App lets you instantly invest as little or as much as you want. This way, when your favorite company's stock is just a little too expensive, you can still own a piece with as little as $1. And because Cash App is directly connected to your bank account, there are no 4 to 5 day waiting periods for inbound transfers, so you can start investing today. All right, you don't have to stack slivers of shares. The option is there. Optionality. We talk about this a lot in this podcast. It's good. I know a lot of you are saying, why will you stack slivers of shares? I don't know. It's a personal preference. It's up to you. If you want to, it's there. If you want to stack sats, you can keep stacking sats. Brokerage services are provided by Cash App Investing, a subsidiary of Square and member SIPC. As always, use the code STACKINGSATS. One word, STACKINGSATS. You're going to get $10, and Cash App is going to send $10 to good friends at Owls Lacrosse. That's Owls Lacrosse. Download the Cash App from the App Store or Google Play Store today and enjoy this episode, freaks. Enjoy your Christmas and your Hanukkah, too.
Tales from the Crypt.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here in Brooklyn with another remote interview with a very special guest, a man I've been following on Twitter for many years, been infinitely fascinated by his takes. I think we align pretty well philosophically, and just really excited to jump into this conversation. I want to introduce you freaks to Dave Collum. Dave, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love these sort of chats.
No, I get a lot of value out of you having these chats too. We were just talking about your most recent podcast on QTR when you were peeing into a mug. That was a great app. I love QTR too. As a fellow Philadelphian, I think he's got a very good podcast.
Right.
Yeah. So the reason
He's not.
I wanted to get you on today is multifaceted. I want to talk about Bitcoin at some point. This is a Bitcoin podcast. I want to talk about inflation at some point. But first, I want to talk about your year-end review. You do an annual year-end review that tends to trigger some people. And you're about to drop yours tonight, hopefully, if the revisions get in. And you think it's going to cause a couple shitstorms, particularly around climate change. Why do you think that is?
Well, every year I write about things that I care about, and sometimes there's stuff that I think I care about. When it comes time to write, I don't care about it. This year, I think climate change was my biggest, most sort of, cathartic section of the thing. And I'm going to dial it back. For years, I've been surrounded by climate change believers. And I, one night I had dinner with the Secretary of Energy, and I told him I was agnostic. And he flinched, and I said, well, but it would take me 10,000 hours to be qualified to have an opinion. And what had been bothering me is how many people who I didn't think were qualified seemed to have a strong opinion. And he conceded that point. And then I had a couple of people nagging me to look into climate change, and they would say things like, there's important scientists who don't believe the climate's changing that much, or don't believe humans are doing it. I'd say, everyone I know thinks climate change is real. Now, I don't know a single person who doesn't. And they'd say, well, prominent scientists don't believe it. And so I said, well, send me some, right? Give me some links. And so I expected that they would send me some names from, Sheboygan State College of, Agriculture and whatever. And instead they sent me a list of people who were serious, big swinging dicks. And I said, okay, but these guys probably didn't deny climate change. They probably shot down some model, and the deniers, which I call them deniers and changers, the deniers probably claim credit for it, even though they just mathematically torched somebody's model, right? And so I started Googling them, and that was not the case. These were serious scientific players, Nobel Prize winners, physicists, solar physicists, who were saying that the climate change story is just wrong. It's just, and they were saying the science was shoddy, and so the first sort of domino to fall was the claim that no serious scientist would deny climate change. And I had just found dozens actually who were denying climate change, who were, one guy was head of the National Academy of Sciences, one guy, solar physicist, chairman of Hebrew University's physics department, right? I mean, these are seriously smart guys. And they were saying it's baloney, it's a hoax. Some were saying, it's not what they're, as extreme as people say. So there's degrees of denial. So I started digging in, and what I conclusion I came to, not with great confidence because I didn't do 10,000 hours, but a big part of it is a hoax, I think. There's a $600 billion a year being spent on all facets of climate change. And one of the realizations is that the huge conflict of interest mean that if we found out that climate change was a dud, $600 billion would go poof. And so what are the odds someone's going to find climate change is a dud? And the answer is zero, right? There's too much money riding on it now. So, and I tear into it. I have like 26 maxims where I talk about all the problems, the dying polar bears and how much of a crock they are and stuff like that. Just all the stories. Receding glaciers have horrifyingly inaccurate depictions behind them. And so I chew away on that and act like a judge. I don't know the field, but I'm adjudicating the case between the deniers and the changers. And the changers, there's a lot of lying going on in that field. There's a lot of real fraud.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems that way, right? You have the a front child of the movement, Greta. They're parading her.
Well, that's comically stupid, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, at least I think so.
Yeah, but you could argue that the scientists are not doing that, right? You could argue that's just, the scientists might be doing their job, and I think they probably are, but I think if you got a scientist behind closed doors, they'd say, look, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. But I think the scientists would not be out there screaming about the destruction of the planet.
Well, if you were able to find all these scientists who had come to the conclusion that maybe the climate is not changing in the ways that people like to think it is, how come none of those sources are getting into the mainstream or aren't getting out to, like, how over what?
Oh, they get shut down fast. So there's a great story, like the guy at Hebrew University, remarkably smart. This guy graduated from college at 18 or something. He's a genius. He published an article in Forbes basically saying it's the sun, stupid, right? I mean, it's the sun. If you follow solar cycles and you follow Earth's temperature, it's the solar cycles. And he said, he also claimed that there's not a shred of direct evidence that CO2 changes the temperature of the planet. And I'm not qualified to say that's true or not. I am qualified to say that that guy's smart as hell. It's his business, and he's doubting, right? And he published this in Forbes, and about 3 hours later, they pulled the article.
Really?
Yeah, Forbes said it's not up to our standards.
Was this recently?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some profound liars in the field, right? There's fraud, charlatans, liars. There's things like, I don't know. We've all heard that 97% of climate scientists believe that. It turns out that's a complete fraud. That is a complete fraud.
Where's that stat coming from?
Well, so there's a number of, one guy did a great dissection of a whole bunch of polls, and he looked at each one and said, how'd they do it? That particular one, and I heard a guy say that's not even a debatable number. That's true. One of my colleagues at Cornell, right, supposed to be a smart guy. That comes from someone who plowed through 11,000 papers on climate science, looked at just the abstracts, forgivable. You can't read 11,000 papers. They culled out all the papers that didn't meet some criteria, right? First and foremost, the abstract said nothing about climate change. And they culled it down to a subset of 11,000 papers that turned out to be 79 papers, of which 77 said there was climate change. And that is 97%.
So that's where they're pulling that stat from.
So 77 out of 79 that were culled from 11,000. That's where that number comes from. So someone who knows that, who cites that number, they're a liar. If they know that's where it comes from and they cite that, they're a liar, they're a fraud. I'm calling you out. You can suck my salty balls, you bastard. Right?
Well, I guess we should dive into what are the specifics of the conflicts of interest? Like Forbes pulled that article, or is the media connected to it? You said there was $600 billion.
$600 billion,
yeah.
Right? I mean, that pays off. That pays a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? There's whole departments of universities. There's whole divisions of governments. There's whole programs to fund solar cells. There's lobbies. So here's a great story that I picked up this year. Michael Moore went to make a movie, right? It's not hard to picture the movie Michael Moore wanted to make. And he dug into it, and the guy he made it with, a guy named Gibbs, I think it is, who he made Fahrenheit, whatever. He did a bunch of movies with him. They dug into it. And there was this article, and it quoted them, and they said, we dug into this, and it's just not what we realized. And they said that the big conflict is in the climate industry. And what they discovered was the story was just all wrong. And then it was people looking for handouts and tax rebates and selling solar panels. And it was people whose entire jobs are about screaming about climate change. And so the movie that they ended up making was called Planet of the Humans. You can see the Planet of the Apes spin there. My understanding is it's going to, of course, hammer big industry, but it's not going to hammer big oil. It's going to hammer big wind, big solar, stuff like that.
Yeah, because we're finding out in Germany right now that as much as we want these renewable energies to come to fruition and come to the market, it's really the wind only blows. You can't really make the wind blow, and you can't control the clouds. And I think Germany's finding out. They had a huge green energy push the last decade, and it's becoming very unprofitable from them too. So they're trying to force us into energy sources that aren't really profitable at the end of the day or reliable.
Yeah, I've known Chris Martinson for probably 20 years now. Ironically, we've never met. It's just digital, right? But I have friends who I've never met. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you call these people, acquaintances. I don't know. Chris got interested in resource depletion. Chris is remarkably green. Chris thinks we're destroying the planet. I sign off on all that. Now, I think the Earth's more durable than people think, right? And all you have to do is remember back to those who say, oh, no, we're destroying the Earth. George Carlin said it well. He said, look, the Earth's going to be fine. We're just not going to be there to see it. But just as a reminder, I remember when, for example, the oil wells were burned in Iraq, and it was going to be nuclear winter with all those oil wells burning away. Saddam had nuked us, and we had Carl Sagan on TV talking about nuclear winter and this and that. and we put them out, and it was gone, right? So you go, okay, apparently not. The one that really was horrifying and vividly horrifying was when the Gulf oil spill, right? And from the gates of hell, we'd opened up the Earth's core, and oil was spewing out in vast quantities. It was just filling the Gulf, and it was going to turn the Gulf into the Dead Sea, right? And then we kept it, and now everyone was like, well, no, there's still some damage. I go, yeah, but there's still fish in there, they're still swimming there, they're still doing everything. You can still, it's gone, right? For all intents and purposes, it's as far gone as the Exxon Valdez is gone. So the Earth is much more durable than we ever give it credit.
Yeah.
And so it's climate change.
No, I also like that example they gave on QTR about the coral reefs too. After like a hurricane decimated, I forget what area, the reefs sort of replenished because people weren't swimming in the ocean with lotion and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. That actually came through a friend of mine who was talking to some tour boat guy in the Caribbean, and my friend was talking to the guy who was setting it up, and he asked about the reefs. He said, "Oh, the reefs have never been better." And my friend said, "Why?" And he's an engineer at Cornell, and the guy said, "Well, because of the hurricanes, which actually beat up the reefs pretty badly. But because of the hurricane, we've had no tourist seasons for several years." And he says that the reefs are totally rejuvenating because you don't have apparently the sunscreen is a disaster, people fondling the reefs, stepping on them with their flippers, and that by the reefs being left alone, they've completely come back. I've read places that the reefs go through life-death cycles repeatedly. They cycle like everything else in nature. Now, I can't confirm this because I saw it just once, but I've been told the Great Barrier Reef has dozens and dozens of die-off rebirths. And we could just be looking. Here's the mistake the climate science and more to the point, the climate activists, the biggest mistake of them all, I think they make. What they do is they try to figure out all the things that can explain the changes. And then what they do is they use process of elimination. They'll say, okay, we can explain all these changes, but there's still this wad left, and that must be human. And that kind of logic I run into a lot in chemistry, where a student will say, well, what else could it be? And my answer is, without fail, all the things you're too goddamn stupid to realize. And so because these guys have like when you do long division and you have a remainder, they say, well, that remainder's human. And that's stupid, right? That's shoddy science.
Yeah. No, that's actually... this is probably a part of the conversation where you can insert Bitcoin into, because I think Bitcoin actually produces an actionable thing that we can use to actually help clean up the environment, because it creates the incentive specifically to go consume stranded gas, which is one of the worst.
Why is that now? Explain that.
So Bitcoin mining is very energy intensive. Takes a lot of...
So just the consumption of energy. Yeah. I've never known which of those numbers to believe, right? So I'm reaching a point in my life and a point in my effort to understand the world. And because every year seems different, I have to study different things every year to understand it. I don't believe anything anymore. So someone will cite, I cited a paper the other day, yesterday, I put it on Twitter. I posted a paper about Pelosi's brother-in-law getting some $750 million contract for solar panels, right? I just posted, I said, look, is this an impeachable or imprisonable offense, right? I just asked that rhetorical question, given that she's hammering on Trump, right? It just seemed like a well-timed. Someone sent it to me. It's an 8-year-old article. And this guy, Scott Nations from CNBC, jumped all over me. I've never seen this guy on my Twitter feed. And he's talking about what a loser I was, and anyone could have shown that was baloney in 2 minutes. And he cited, checkfacts.org. Well, it turns out that the various fact-checking organizations are these partisan operations. And so someone had actually already pointed that out to me. And I went to checkfacts.org and I read what they said about that article. But then what I did is I booted up a couple other articles like, Steele dossier, things like that, to see what checkfacts said about that. And they were wrong on all those. They were wrong on the Syrian chlorine gas attacks. They were wrong in all the things that we now have information. They were wrong about Comey and Clapper, and right. So we don't have a source of valid information. We don't have a Walter Cronkite. We have bloggers. That's all we got. We have guys like you, Marty.
Well, no, it's true, and that's actually one of the Bitcoiners' favorite books that they like to read. It's called The Sovereign Individual. It was written in 1996 by David Rees-Mogg, the current British part.
I know Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, this was written by him and Lee Davidson, and they basically predicted that in the future, in the information age, you have to be able to validate things for yourselves. You're not going to be able to tell what's true or false.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I watch the sources and I watch them cross. And if I see an article that comes out of some obscure place, and here's how I saw it happen. I saw it personally happen. I was talking to a guy named Tony Deaton, who turns out to be a famous Swiss money manager, old money, wealth preservation guy. And I eventually talked him into doing an interview on Real Vision TV, only to find out after the fact it's the first interview he ever did. And I didn't know that. So Real Vision did this big hoopla, and I go, shit, did I do that? So anyway, so I'm talking to Tony, and Tony says he bought GLD. And he had $60 million worth of GLD, and he tried to cash it in for hard gold. And GLD said, take a hike. And he said he had a team of lawyers, and he tried to press GLD to give him the gold. Now, I think within the prospectus, they didn't have to. But Tony tried, and they didn't give it to him.
Is GLD the ETF?
So I posted that. I told a friend that story. And then I watched that move around the globe. And then I called Tony back. I said, Tony, please tell me that story's true. Did I get it right? And he said, yeah. He says, I wrote about it in 05 or 07 or some years back. And I looked up, and there it was. He had written about it. But I watched my transmission circumnavigate the gold globe, because I told Grant Williams, he put it in one of his blogs, and boom, off it went. And Dave's story had become part of the fabric of the gold community. And it was right, but the source sucked.
And it's fascinating how quickly that can spread, right? Like I had the pleasure of interviewing Jack Dorsey earlier this year, and it was crazy.
Oh, that'd be fun.
It was the first time experience like fake news in real life, being a part of a story that was fake news.
I think he's sincere. Did you get that impression?
I do. I
think he's a lefty, but I think he's sincere.
I do as well. Disclaimer: Cash App, which is a Square company, is a sponsor of this podcast. But I do.
Okay.
I do think he is pure and for the cause he's doing, and at least
he believes it.
What he's doing with Bitcoin in particular, I think he's earnest. I think he's
right. But so Twitter is said to be this left-leaning thing. I think that's true. But I think that I don't think they're left-leaning like some partisan hit job. I think they just lean left.
Yes, no, and you can see last week.
It's a sincere left-leaning, right?
Yeah, and last week I think Jack's thread about hiring 5 developers to work on an open source standard for social media, in which he could give up control, and Twitter wouldn't be the only client through which people could send these types of messages, was an admission that he sort of wants to give up control. He doesn't like having to censor people.
He doesn't want to be in vetting. So one day, Rudy, you got to know.
Oh, Rudy Van Havenstein. He's one of my favorites.
Rudy's the Twitter legend, right? So one day, Rudy sends me a direct message. I don't even know who Rudy is. Rudy's a friend. I do not know who he is. Rudy sends me a direct message. He says, we're about to get booted off Twitter. And he says, go look at Jack's feed. And Jack had followed the two of us. And I said, I don't think Jack's in charge of booting us. And I actually know where it came from. Because one day I was feeling sort of warm and fuzzy. And I said, people bitch about Twitter, but I find it to be a remarkable ecosystem. And remarkably open to ideas. And it's a friendly place to be for the most part, right? And I said, and then, of course, Rudy Havenstein is here. So how could you not love this place, right? Somehow that got on Jack's desk, and he followed the two of us. That's how that happened. But not many people have the coveted Jack follow, right? In the world of Twitter, where there's people who are important because you want to talk to them, but then there's just the trophy, right?
Yeah.
There's the Tanya McGrath, Jack Dorsey, Joe Rogan, Guys like that who, I chat occasionally with Joe, but it's more just wow, right?
Yeah,
these are heroes.
No, I know the feeling. I am also in the Jack Dorsey follow club. It feels
you lucky boy.
It's a badge.
There's about 3,000 of us, so it's not that elite, but it's 3,000 versus about 5 million the other way. So
yeah, it's honored to be in it with you.
Hi, Jack.
He may be listening. What's up, Jack?
He may be listening. You never know.
No, but going back to like how Bitcoin. So talking about, you're saying that you don't know about the stats on Bitcoin energy. That's a big FUD line out there. Is that Bitcoin consumes so much energy, it's going to boil the oceans.
Right.
But then,
is that true?
I mean, it's true that Bitcoin consumes a lot of energy. Yes, Bitcoin consumes a great amount of energy.
Will that stop when Bitcoin's done being mined, or will that continue as Bitcoin sort of just whips around the blockchain?
That'll continue, but miners over time.
Okay, so it is energetically expensive.
Yes, but so that this is where the nuance comes in, right? So there's definitely a lot of energy consumed, but what you find is that it actually is most of the times either renewable energy in the form of stranded hydroelectric or geothermal, or stranded gas, which is so on.
How is it located? How do you sort of cordon it off that way? How do you know it's that, not just a power cord into a server?
I mean, there is.
How do you know that's the kind of energy fueling it?
There is a power cord into a server at the end of the day.
I know, but the server's hooked up to the grid, right? And that's just energy.
Well, so the economics of Bitcoin mining are such that you need to find the lowest cost energy. And that just so happens.
So they're going and looking for the off-hour power.
Yes, because to help with their profit margins, what you find is the cheapest energy is that which is wasted or not used at all. And so in the case here in America, mining is actually starting to come to America. And what you're seeing in the back end, oil shale in like North Dakota and Utah is a lot of these oil fields. They'll drill oil and then they have excess methane and natural gas. It's just they literally cannot contain it and build the pipes to get it to cities because they're too far. So they're just forced to vent or flare it on site. And it's actually terrible for the environment. And it's a lot of energy that's just wasted. So it's really a distant.
Why don't we put steel mills and stuff up in places like this, right? I mean, for example, there's a company which has done very poorly, I should add, but it's in Iceland and it taps into the geothermal, right?
Yeah.
Why do we not attach smelters or whatever to the natural gas fields?
I can't speak to that specifically. I would imagine, I guess it would be don't the smelters have to be by the supply of where the stuff is mined, or?
Yeah, well, maybe, but if there was something that would require a huge amount of heat, for example, the idea of getting free energy, because you're for one thing, it probably costs the energy companies to flare it. They probably have to pay some tax on the flaring.
Yeah, so that's a big problem. They have emissions taxes.
So the energy companies would pay you to take that flared gas and use it.
Yes, and that's
and then the question becomes, why not? Like for example, in Iceland, they have aluminum, processing plants and stuff like that, and they're there because of the geothermal, not because of the aluminum.
Yeah, well, I imagine it's just a lot. And why would you choose Bitcoin over doing a smelter on site? It's probably just a lot cheaper to do Bitcoin to get the raw materials and bring them on site.
So the servers are up at the.
Yeah, so that's
up at the site.
So the problem is it's a travel and distance problem. They literally can't transport the energy from the fields to the cities. It's not profitable to build the pipes, nor is it possible to contain all the energy and get them into pipes. So you solve that transport problem by showing up to the field, and you bring the Bitcoin miners to the source, and you cap it on the field, mine the Bitcoin on site, and then you can send it anywhere in the world.
So what's the current number of Bitcoin left to be mined? What's that number now?
It's less than 3 million. We're over 18 million.
So that means you've got at current prices around $20 billion of Bitcoin left out there at current prices.
You're probably better at math than me.
So you take 1,000 and you make it a million into a billion.
Current price right
7
now.
7 times 3 is 20 billion.
The price has been so volatile this week. It's at 71.50.
We'll call it 7,000, right?
Yeah. Yeah, current
So
prices.
it's about $20 billion. How long before you think that's gone?
The rest of the Bitcoin?
Yeah. How long before they've mined it out?
2140 is when the last Bitcoin will be mined. So Bitcoin supplies.
That's known. That's a projectable number.
Yes, because of the way Bitcoin mining works.
The algorithm.
Most importantly, the difficulty adjustment of the mining. So if too many miners.
So how many per year get mined then? Right now.
So every 210,000. So the schedule started from the Genesis block to block 210,000. There was 50 Bitcoin per minute, per block. So half the supply was mined up front in the first 4 years. So that was, doing math in my head right now, like 10.5 million in the first 4 years. Then cut that in half again. So we did 5.25 million between 2012 and 2016. 2016, there was another halving that cut that to 12.5 Bitcoin per 10 minutes. That's what we're currently in. Next May, that'll get cut to 6.25 Bitcoin per 10 minutes.
So it's very formulaic. Then.
Yes.
Do I remember this correctly? So in some sense, I make for the perfect person because I know something, but not much. Individuals could mine Bitcoin in the early days, right?
Yes,
you could just get on your computer.
Yes,
and mine it, right?
So the way mining has evolved throughout the years, it went from CPU chips from your laptop you can mine on your MacBook to GPU chips, which are graphics processing units, which are usually used for gaming computers, to a short period of FPGAs. I forget what that stands for, but now the market is. The standard is an ASIC, so it's a chip that's dedicated to solving the Bitcoin SHA-256 hashing algorithm particularly. It does that one function and nothing else. And what we're seeing is that ASICs are becoming more commodified over time. They're becoming more efficient and having longer life cycles.
These are serious servers now, right? You're in some big stuff with this A6s, right?
Yeah, they're not like a miner still.
These are not retail miners now.
I mean, you could retail. So that's the thing. Like if you have cheap energy or energy that you're able to siphon off somewhere, like in a college dorm room, say, like you can personally mine and contribute to what's called a mining pool and get a payout a little bit. You're not going to find a block yourself, but you will contribute hash rate to a pool, and that pool will divvy up the coins that they receive.
Does mining require skill, or is it literally just a CPU thing?
No skill at all. It just requires plugging a machine in and pointing it somewhere.
I see. Okay. So what's your biggest fear? What's the biggest risk to Bitcoin as far as you're concerned?
Apathy. And people don't realize that they need it.
Well, what if apathy goes on forever?
I don't know. I hope it doesn't. Bitcoin could still persist. It's just whether or not, Bitcoin's the biggest hurdle Bitcoin has to overcome is the state, and is very much an affront to their ability. Their ability to print money. But I do believe it is the fundamentals of the system are such that it does have a chance at actually being able to fend off attacks from the state.
Well, you're the most circumspect person I've talked to about Bitcoin. Most of them are doing the, fist pump. They can't touch us. And I'm going, I don't believe that. I think the way you presented it sounds reasonably valid.
Yeah.
And that is that you are going to have to beat the sovereign states. I see several foes for you guys. One is you're going to have to beat the sovereign states, all of them, because they're not going to like it. They'll pretend like they don't care, but I'm positive they won't like it. Does Bitcoin have to be convertible to dollars for it to be worth anything?
I don't think so, no. It just has to be convertible. If it's to be a money, it just has to be convertible for goods and services, right?
Okay.
It would be much harder. But
that becomes exposure to the state, right? Because it's essentially like saying, sort of in this surreal world of Bitcoin, you're safe. The second you sort of reach out of that world and you connect to the real world where the sovereigns are the biggest kids on the block, you're at great risk of them saying you can't do that.
No, I agree. I like to visualize it like a shuttle going into space, and we're still Bitcoin has to sort of grow and run parallel to the current financial system and the incumbent system, and eventually sort of parasitically siphon off of it, and then after it's out of the atmosphere, break off into its own thing, right? And eventually run in the wild by itself.
It seems to me that for Bitcoin, I did about a 3-hour one day with a guy, ironically located in Moscow, former NSA guy. I don't know why NSA guys are living in Moscow, right? This my head. And he said that Bitcoin does not have to go mainstream to thrive.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right?
Okay, but if you can never leave Bitcoin world without getting sort of caught, right? Without the sovereign saying, "Oh, by the way, you just bought a car with Bitcoin," the tax on that is 50%.
No, yeah, it's definitely a problem that has been overcome. But people find creative ways to get Bitcoin into dollars without going through a centralized exchange.
Well, but now you're potentially quite readily they can convert that to a federal offense.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The sovereigns can do anything they want. They can outlaw. They've proven that. So now what you have to become is an outlaw. To do that. And most people won't do that, and therefore it'll keep Bitcoin at a profoundly low level, sort of just for outlaws to exchange chits with each other, right?
Well, I don't like that narrative that it's all like outlaws. So in Bitcoin, as much as it doesn't need mainstream adoption, especially here in the West, like it doesn't need adoption in the West, probably won't get adoption in the West. The people that need it most are people in places like Venezuela, Argentina,
right?
People that are
Hong Kong.
People are being forced into it that way, and that's what Bitcoin is really there when you have no other options, and it serves that need very well. We're actually finding there's a gentleman here in New York City, Matt Alborg. He sat down with him a couple episodes ago. He's doing some great research on P2P exchanges in like across the world, and he found that actually Bitcoin is being used mostly, not mostly, but like Bitcoin adoption in states like Venezuela, Argentina, Hong Kong, Russia is higher than most when you factor in GDP per capita and access to the internet and stuff like that. So even though
well, so there's an interesting old school analogy to this. I read this article once where a guy told a story about a check that finally made it back to him, where he had written a check in some distant land for some service. By the time it made it back to him, it was covered with scrawl. And the check had become a valid check from a US bank had become a currency. And they were transferring it to each other. And the check was making the rounds, and it got more and more signatures and sign-offs and stuff. When it finally made it back to him, the thing had been used as a currency for a very long time, just because it was a valid check from a valid Western bank. And so in some sense, that's what you're describing. You're describing a currency that is designed to be able to circumvent decidedly bad authorities, right?
That is, Bitcoin cannot work if it does not fulfill that use case.
So what I have trouble picturing is Bitcoin becoming truly mainstream. I don't think the Western authorities will let it by. And I know people say that, yes, we can do it without them, but again, if they outlaw it and Joe Sixpack has to become an outlaw to use it, they're not going to, right? We could also, in theory, not pay our taxes, but we also know we'll get screwed.
No, I agree. And that's why...
So then the next... Go ahead.
I was going to say that's why, we got to win the battle of ideas. I think it's important that the oil and gas industry here in the States is getting involved. It's a big lobby. If it's helping them reduce emissions and become more profitable, I'm sure they'll have an incentive to fight for Bitcoin. There are representatives.
Well, here's another analogy for Bitcoin. Talking to you is making me think about it. In some sense, it's like Napster.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
a lot
Napster
like
started out this background thievery of songs, and the system was able to adopt it, exploit it, turn it into iTunes, right? and use the business model of Napster and incorporate it into the mainstream, which allowed, therefore, the idea of Napster to survive.
But why were they able to shut down Napster?
Well, I don't think they shut it down per se. I think they brought it above board.
Well, they shut it down in its initial state. There's no free file sharing.
Yeah. Yeah,
but
yes.
why were they able to shut it down?
I don't know. I mean, because people don't like to break the law.
Because they had a central leader. Because they had somebody they could go to and say, "Hey, you built Napster."
Yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah. I totally get that.
So then there
was a guy.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name.
Because Bitcoin's immaculate inception, you sort of have this jurisdictional arbitrage that will play out. Like if one state makes Bitcoin illegal, it will. Yeah, they'll may make it illegal for their citizens, but it will work around the world without them, and other jurisdictions may say, "Hey, we like Bitcoin, we're going to use it."
So the other interesting challenge I think Bitcoin faces right now, it's the dominant player, right? If you say Bitcoin, it's like saying Kleenex, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of bathroom tissues, but Kleenex says it all. But aren't there something like 5,000 cryptos right now?
Yes, there are a lot of affinity scams in Bitcoin's wake.
Yeah, right. And so it seems to me the other risk is there's always metaphors. It reminds me of the dot-coms, where one of the things that caused the dot-com bubble to burst was there was just this overwhelming supply of these random dot-com companies. And eventually it kind of caused the whole edifice to topple over. Now you had survivors, just like you had car companies that survived the 20s and 30s when there were something like 250 of them.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah.
So you have survivors. But it strikes me as possible that to survive may not necessarily be the leader in 2019.
I would push back with that and say that I would compare Bitcoin not to the dot-com, not to the dot-com bubble, not to the companies that made up the dot-com bubble, but the protocol wars that came before the dot-com bubble, the CompuServe versus AOL versus the open internet.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
So
yeah, right.
That's more analogous to what's going on in Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is a protocol, and protocols have different network effects and distributed system effects that they are, I would argue, more winner take all than a stock market or something like that.
Right. So yeah, it's like battles between Microsoft Word and WordPerfect and all sorts of things where Beta versus VHS, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm told Beta lost that because they somehow made it not porn friendly. and so yeah, so I guess one of my concerns would be, and I'm not saying therefore you're an idiot because I don't believe that. You were an idiot if you bought Bitcoin at $1 and sold it for $5. That one of my concerns would be that you don't know who the winner is going to be. Bitcoin's the leader, no question. But when you got 5,000 contenders, now I read, again, I don't know what to believe, but I read that there's ones which are much more efficient than Bitcoin, much more consumer friendly than Bitcoin. I don't know. If your listeners are Bitcoin fans, don't send me an email, or if you want to send it, I don't care, but I'm not picking on you, right? I'm just saying that when there's 5,000, this is like a big Wimbledon bracket, right? And you guys have the lead. You're the top seed, but it doesn't say that in the end it's going to be you.
Very, very valid concern and argument, but I would push back by saying that you're never going to be able to replicate the essence of Bitcoin's immaculate conception. Now that there's many eyes on this space, the purity of Bitcoin's launch can never be replicated. So that's one thing. Number two,
it's Amazon.
Yeah. Number two, the more efficient, faster, lighter blockchains, they may market themselves with that, but they also don't tell you about the trade-offs that come with those better functionalities. Bitcoin is actually at the protocol level slow, dumb, and pretty stupid. Like it only does a very few things, but it does them very well, and that's all Bitcoin at the protocol level needs to do. It doesn't need to be able to do very complex computations at the protocol level. We should probably put that up the stack, the second and third layers. So Bitcoin.
Well, gold's a pretty stupid metal too. But
exactly. So it only needs to do very few things. It needs to assure that any individual can download the blockchain, participate in the network, and send a transaction without it being censored and in a peer-to-peer fashion. That's all it needs to do. then everything else from there is gravy.
Right.
Everybody else, in my opinion, came in, saw how, and that's the thing. These are open source softwares. They can be forked, and you can easily spin up your own cryptocurrency. And people saw that and saw it as a way to make money and are trying to replicate Bitcoin's success. But I would argue,
yeah, those are just schemes, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about the. Give me some background or give me some insight into the. I read about Bitcoin scams, and I don't even know these exchanges and where some guy walks away, dies with 190 million with the codes. Then they say, oh, maybe he didn't die after all, right? Maybe he's down there with Jeffrey Epstein and his friend. Who knows, right? So tell me about the risk factors that the media loves to present, just like they like to talk about tungsten-filled gold bars, right?
Yes. Exchange hacks throughout have been the bane of Bitcoin's existence throughout its history. Obviously, Mt. Gox being the biggest. Bitfinex was hacked a few years ago. And that's, there's a lot of FUD around that. A lot of people see that exchange are getting hacked and sort of push that on Bitcoin and say Bitcoin is getting hacked, but that's not the case. Bitcoin, like gold, is a bearer asset. It's a digital bearer asset. When you have Bitcoin on an exchange, you are basically, it's like having Bitcoin in a vault. You're trusting that the people that operate that vault are going to.
Right. So gold's safe, the vault's not.
Yes, and exactly. And so when you have Bitcoin, what you should do is take it into your own possession. And it demands extreme ownership. It is a bearer asset at the end of the day.
And then there's those horror stories, like these have nothing to do with Bitcoin, but the guy who had all his codes on a hard disk and his wife, put it in the trash. And I'm thinking, if I had my codes on a hard disk, I'd have about 20 hard disks, right? I'd have thumb drives. I'd have all sorts of shit tucked away. There's just no way. Hard drives fail, right? What was he thinking?
So you'll like this story. I don't know if you have time to go back and listen to a podcast, but we had a guy by the name of John Doe on a few months ago, and he was actually one of the biggest drug dealers.
Yeah, dated Jane Roe, right? Got in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. They got in a lot. Well, this guy did get in a lot of trouble. He was a drug dealer on the Silk Road, and he was one of the biggest dealers on the website.
Is he the guy who got thrown in the Huskow for Silk Road? I can't remember.
No, not Ross Ulbricht. This is just
right. That's the guy.
This was an individual dealer on the site, and he actually wound up getting arrested for something not to do with the Silk Road, something to do with meat space of him dealing in person. He went to jail, and they took all of his personal possessions, where they put it in bags and they keep it for you and give it back to you when you get out. So he spent 4 years in jail, and they put his USB with all of his Bitcoin that he made from the Silk Road on it, and they literally handed his Bitcoin back to him. Like when he got out of jail, they had no idea it was on this little USB stick. So he was he was forced to hold all of his Bitcoin from like $20 to $1,200.
Oh yeah, if you could give me Bitcoin for $20 and let me out with it at $1,200, I'd go to jail.
Right.
I wouldn't hang myself, but yeah, that's interesting.
But it shows the power of Bitcoin.
So unbelievable stories. There must be some spectacular stories of, I did a podcast the other day with Max Kaiser and Stacy Herbert, and they were very early adopters. They must be stinking rich, right? I mean, just truly extraordinarily wealthy now.
Yeah, they're big Bitcoin believers. They've been around for a while.
Right, and they've been it for a long time. I mean, Max has been ranting. So, and given that they started life with some resources, right? This is not the 12-year-old in middle school, who also, a few of them have done well, apparently. But these guys must have thrown a lot of money at the start. And when you multiply, 70,000% or something, you win.
Yeah, some people have gotten insanely rich from this stuff.
And there must be people who have totally liquidated, right? They've just done it, and then
There was the infamous bear whale. He sold 30,000 Bitcoin at $300, and I was around then. We all watched the order books. I forget I think it was OKCoin maybe. We all watched the order books as they ate away at 30,000 Bitcoin. This dude sold at $300.
See, people ask me, I do so many podcasts now, but Tony Greer from TG Macro, he asked me, do you have Bitcoin? And he asked me two questions. I said no and no. He couldn't believe it. And I said, here's what would have happened. I think I first started paying attention to Bitcoin was back in the single-digit dollar value, right? But it was so wacky looking, right? It was so fringy looking. It had to be a religious faith. By the way, you have to have religious faith to hang on to anything good, right? You buy Microsoft at the IPO, the temptation to take profits on that would have been overwhelming the whole way, right? And so if I had bought Bitcoin at 10 and it went up to 100, I would have sold. I would have said, look, this is this creepy, weird currency that so-and-so convinced me to buy. Tenfold, I'm taking it, I'm done. And then I would have been in therapy for the rest of my life. Right? So I don't regret not buying it because I would have been the guy who sold, $800 worth of founder shares of Apple.
Now
I wouldn't have.
There's many of those stories out there. I know some.
Oh, there's countless stories out there.
Yeah, well,
right. It's gotta be.
That's the thing. The volatility is really jarring to some people.
It's way worse than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, doesn't it make sense, though? We're trying to discover a new digital monetary good. Wouldn't it be?
Someone was talking about how Bitcoin had settled down and that was a problem. I have mixed emotions on that because if Bitcoin's going to work, it's got to settle down.
Yeah, at some point, but I don't think that's going to be anytime soon.
Right. But if it doesn't settle down, it becomes just sort of the speculator's playground. And so it's not going to serve this sort of the universal purpose. If I go to the store tomorrow and my groceries cost 20% more because some whale dumped Bitcoin, it's a problem, right?
Yeah, well,
currency needs to hold value.
Yeah, that's but does it go through a continuum, right? Does it start out as a collectible like it was in 2010 where it didn't have a price, then move to a store of value where you're literally using it as a saving account?
Well,
and then when
it's more of a store of value.
Yes, right. But it's more of a store of value now.
What's that?
Say it's more of a story, the overwhelming use case now is store of value, but that's not to say that medium of exchange won't come in the future, right?
Right, but for example, the dollar would not be the reserve currency if you could lose half of its value in a year.
Yes.
Right, so Bitcoin has to settle down if it's going to mainstream, I think.
Oh, I agree. I would agree with that. But it will just take time.
Here's the question: will the Bitcoin owners? Will that then trigger a big sell-off again, right? It's kind of a paradox in that on the one hand, I think a lot of owners of Bitcoin are not doing it as a store of value. They're doing it because they want to get rich.
I think you'd be...
So the question is, what's the equilibrium price where the people holding it are willing to hold it at that price and not worry about the fact that it's not going up?
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised at the amount of fanatic long-term holders. We call them hodlers here. There's a funny story behind that.
Yeah, we call them hodlers in gold too. Yeah.
Anecdotally, I don't know the exact number. I know there's very, very strong contingent on Twitter, at least, and I've met very serious long-term hodlers in life. There are people that view Bitcoin as an opportunity to revolt against the fiat banking system. That they.
Oh yeah. So that's why I'm not in any way hostile to it. I'll tell you what you guys do to me that's painful. I think you're cannibalizing safe haven asset investors.
Hey, I
think gold is better.
I'm a big believer in the gold bugs and the Bitcoiners should get along.
No, I totally agree with that actually. But I think gold would be higher if Bitcoin didn't exist. I think it's sapping up demand. I think actually GLD was invented to sop up demand so that people wouldn't grab the gold. I think GLD was give the proletariat their paper gold, and they can of course make money off GLD, stuff like that. But I think the rush to gold in the absence of Bitcoin, in the absence of GLD, there'd be a physical gold squeeze that would be pretty hard.
Oh, I don't disagree with that.
In some sense, I'm a consequence. My world's a consequence of your world. In some sense.
No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's opportunity cost, right? At the end of the day, you got to decide where you want to park your wealth. And I think moving forward, at least me personally, when viewing the option to store my wealth in gold or Bitcoin, I'm going to choose Bitcoin just because it's easier to send. It's hard to get physical gold and then protect it. It's just Bitcoin's easier to protect, send. It's more divisible and actually more extendable as well.
Right. And then at the same time, gold has that history.
Exactly. It has the Lindy effects.
Right. If you were to say, look, one of these two will be zero in 20 years, you know which one you'd have to bet on, right?
Bitcoin, yeah.
Yeah. So that it's kind of a conservative versus non-conservative wealth preservation, right?
Yeah. But that's not to say there's not room for both, right? Because
I think there is room for both.
Yeah. And that's
there's just like we have a euro and a dollar, right?
Yeah. No. Well, I like to have both options. The more hard assets that people can save their purchasing
So
power
what
in, the
year
better.
did you start buying Bitcoin?
Oh,
You, young squire,
it's a
Marty Bent.
it's a very personal question. No, I got into Bitcoin when I was in college. I was studying economics in college at DePaul University, and I was
What year?
2012. I was taking.
You have some Bitcoin.
No, I was a poor college student, mind you, and I learned about it. I actually did read up on it before I dumped a bunch of money into it.
Okay.
But yeah, I was in college studying economics. I think I stumbled into it because we were writing a paper on monetary policy, and I was like Googling exotic monetary policies.
The monetary system was run by idiots, right?
Well,
that's what you realize.
At the same time, I was working at a managed futures fund, and so we were in a fund of funds, and so we had a bunch of CTAs indexed in our fund, and my job was to write our commentaries on why the fund performed the way it did, which entailed me speaking with all the CIOs of the hedge funds we were indexing, and also entailed me following the Fed and other central banks around the world for three years. And so I was learning about Bitcoin and studying this in practice in real life. And yes, I quickly realized that the people that think they're the smartest men in the room had no idea what they're doing.
Right.
I was like 23.
Coolest
Like,
idiots.
what the hell?
Right. There's a name, a Dunning-Kruger effect,
I think
where the people are so.
I can't hear you too great right now.
You were slipping out on me too.
All right, is that better?
Seems fine to me. You were not going out enough to worry me, but.
No, that's perfect. You're back now. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, my story. Yeah, that's how I got into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I lost faith in the Fed very early on. Luckily,
Yeah, we're on the same page there.
I was a senior in high school in the fall of 2008, taking a economics elective actually, and it was literally right when Lehman was collapsing, and my teacher was like, "Oh boys, this is a big thing," and so I went to college with like a no.
I have some funny on record stuff. I sent an email to my former close friend and housemate Rick Sherlin at Goldman back in May 6, 2002. And I can see the email trail below it. And I had said something to him, but I can't see that. But he said, there's always risk. What is it that has you especially on edge right now? This is in 2002. I wrote about a 5-page email, and I laid out the subprime banking crisis in all its glory. And the one thing I got wrong, I said General Electric was going to go south. I said General Motors, whatever that GMAC, whatever the heck that the funding one was going to go south. I said the banks were going to go south. And the one I missed was I thought J.P. Morgan was going to be the tip of the spear, and that turned out to be precisely wrong. And then what? 5 years later, it did. It actually shows you how early the subprime risk was showing up. The subprime risk was actually showing up in the late 90s, believe it or not. So then one day I'm standing in front of my organic chem class, and it was March of 2007. And I always tell stories. I tell stories about what my kids did that were outlandish, tell stories about shit I did that was outlandish, whether I was going to dive into a porta potty to get my watch back, stuff like that. And I turned to the class and I said, sort of out of the blue, I said, the banking system's about to go down now. And they looked at me in utter amazement. Now, this is March of 2007. Now, there was only one indicator that I know of that was saying that, and it was called the market ABX index. It was a derivatives index, and it was starting to tank. It flat as a pancake, and then it just started to tank. And there's this woman named Tanta, code name, who was writing about stuff that was going on inside the pipes of the banking system that was bad. So I turned to the class, I tell them this, and I literally said, which I can't believe, I said, you might find yourself someday not being able to get money out of an ATM machine, right? I can't believe I actually came up with that winner, because that was very close to what we got to. So then, turns out in 2009, I had the same group all over again in a senior honors thesis class. We meet once a week, and the first day of class, I said, and it was February of 2009 now, right? So it's just a complete shitstorm happening. No one could miss it. And I said to the class, I said, did I not tell you that this banking system was going to collapse? And they said, yes, you did. And I said, did any of your econ professors, many double major, And did they tell you? And they said, no. And I said, what are those assholes paid for? Right? So then I had guest lectures through the semester. My first guest lecture for honors thesis chemistry was the CEO of Morgan Stanley Bank. And he spent 2 hours talking to the kids about the mortgage crisis. He had cut his own teeth on generating 2 million-fold levered mortgage-backed security funds. He said he left in 2006 because he saw it coming. He said, I have got to get out of here.
Well,
so
it seems like we're right back where we were in that period of time.
It's very much, and they say the banks are safe. I don't think they are, because corporate debt is considered ground zero.
Yeah, the CLO market is crazy right now.
The CLO, oh my God, the leveraged loan market, which is basically payday lenders for companies, is totally cramped up, and the leverage inside corporate America is so huge. Well, underfunded pensions, all that stuff, and therefore the question is, could the banks possibly be safe when their corporate clients are all not safe? And the answer is no. I don't think so.
No, yeah. I mean, what's going on with this repo market right now? Did you see there was a glitch in the Fed's systems yesterday, and direct deposits were having problems getting out?
I didn't even see it. I was busy yesterday, so I saw nothing yesterday.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What was the glitch?
Apparently a few banks were affected by a network glitch at the Federal Reserve, which prevented them from getting out direct deposits in a timely manner.
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm sure your listeners know this, but back in, I think it was September of 18, there was this big hiccup where the repo rate went from 2%, steady as can be, to 9% one morning.
Yeah, we've been covering.
This rate's not dangerous at all, right?
Yeah, we've been covering that topic pretty heavily here. We actually
and so it's like when your cardiologist says, "Oh shit, what was that?" And then they go, "Oh shit, there it is again," right? You're in trouble at that point. So my theory, I asked tons of people what was happening. I put out an Twitter. I collected in my year in review. I collected all the answers, and they were all delivered with great confidence. And there are dozens of answers. And what I think the bottom line is that the bank is an emergent system, and it is so complicated with so many feedback loops that it just occasionally has a cardiac arrest. And right now it's having cardiac arrests, and the Fed doesn't know what they're doing. They just know that they have to keep shoving money into the banking system as fast as they can. And they're pretending like it's normal, and it's not normal. Right? It's like if your cardiologist said, yeah, that's spiky shit, don't worry about it. That'll pass. That's indigestion. Right? It's not.
No. The most recent episode I recorded, a man named Parker Lewis, he used to work for Kyle Bass. He's like a Fed mensch. He's been following the Fed very intently, reading their...
So where's he work now? Why did he leave Kyle?
He works at Unchained Capital, and works, it's a Bitcoin...
oh my God, dark side. Okay.
Nah, he's a light
I
sider.
love Kyle. I chat with Kyle occasionally. He's an interesting character.
You should ask him about Parker. So Parker, we had a very good conversation. Basically, to simplify, like the Fed unwound $700 billion of their balance sheet over the course of 18 months and didn't expect a liquidity crisis to pop up anywhere when every dollar is levered out like 39 times. It makes sense that there would be a liquidity crisis, right?
So I don't know if they're stupid for not knowing this had to eventually come to this, or if they're stupid or cowardly for not being able to take the pain that's somehow to get from here to normal. It's like, you were in college. Sometimes you just got to hurl, right?
Yeah.
You down that 18th beer and it's time to let her rip. And if you somehow think you get to skip that part, you're dreaming.
Yeah, it seems, but it's as if like they're desperately afraid to let that happen because they think it'll all die.
Well, so here's what I think they're afraid of. So this thing I write, I realized when I got done writing this year's that absolutely every last chapter was more about social change than anything. So I wrote a lot less about screwy IPOs. I didn't even talk about WeWork, right? And I realized that's all kind of pre-game ceremony stuff right now. So we're seeing all sorts of wacky stuff, but until the first kickoff, right? Until that game's in play, and all of a sudden we start seeing that thing exact revenge on the speculators. None of it matters. It's just noise. And so I didn't write about it this year. And so, but I realized that what I wrote about, every single chapter had some component. I wrote about Bitcoin, right? I'm not a hodler. I wrote about Bitcoin because it's about social change, right? I write about gold, social change. Modern monetary theory is about social change.
Is it really? Or is it about control?
Oh, yeah. No, it's rising socialism. It's socialism. It's Marxism on the rise.
Yeah.
And so, I think the Fed is terrified of the next recession because they know that when Joe Sixpack is put out of work again, and they're bailing out the banks again, that it could get violent. I've heard historians say we're pre-Civil War setup right now. You look at it, the rift is big.
I've heard that too. If you look at what's going on in Virginia right now, it's getting scary down there, right?
And I watch Adam Schiff, who I consider to be one of the most repugnant people inside the Beltway, which is like winning Wimbledon, right?
Yeah, it's hard to do.
It's hard to do that. And, it's a bias, right? I have a political bias, but he seems repugnant to me. He was giving a talk and people started yelling from the audience, liar, liar, liar. They were disruptive as hell. And as much as I hate Schiff, I go, this is not good. And it's not good for several reasons. One, it's a sign of the social fabric tearing apart. The second thing is what bothered me more, and some of your followers may be offended by this, but I think that's a tactic of the left, not the right. So the left shouts down the speaker, right? And throws milkshakes on people for being right-wing and stuff like that. So I find the left's behavior to have been pretty appalling since the 2016 election. When they woke up and found out that their favorite candidate was beat by the person they consider the most repugnant person on the planet, they lost their shit. And so they decided that there are no rules and that we're going to change this world. No matter whether we're doing it the right way or the wrong way, we're going to make it happen, right? So it's a kind of a noble cause syndrome, it's called. And I think the left lost their mind. I think the right's going, holy shit, we got a guy in the White House that no one expected. We kind of won, right? The bipartisan message of Trump, bipartisan support should come, is that the two parties try to feed us dog shit. And we said, we're picking them this time. And in some sense, left or right, you should say, that's kind of a win. And it's also a message to the guys inside the Beltway, don't push us. We will vote you out. And we will vote in a bad-looking person if we have to. I actually kind of like Trump now. I mean, I pulled the lever with a very shaky hand that day, only because Hillary was worse than Adam Schiff. But I could have voted for Bernie because they would have neutered him. He wouldn't have done any damage. I could have voted. I was written up in The Guardian for supporting. You're not going to believe this. The Washington bureau chief of The Guardian picked this up off Twitter. He picked up half the story. He says, I'm writing about Elizabeth Warren. This is like 14 or something, 15. It was a long time ago. He said, I'm wondering what this Elizabeth Warren thing is. And I saw that you support her. Now, what he didn't know is I used to chat with her late at night by email. And I'm a Reagan Republican, right? Mm-hmm. But we used to chat late at night. And I wrote some blogs for her and stuff like that. But I said it's weirder than that. Because I also support Ron Paul. And his brain explodes. And I said, it's because I think they're both honest. I'm not so sure about Elizabeth Warren now, although I haven't given up on her, but she's gone super lefty, scary lefty. Maybe she'd pivot to the middle later, but boy, it's her multi-gazillion-dollar plans are scary to a libertarian type.
Yeah.
But in any event, these are repugnant people. But the left lost their mind, the right hadn't. But now when I see those tactics coming out of the right, I go, okay, the war is on now, right?
Yeah, it's pretty fucking scary.
Right.
What do you think there's room for a centrist here? Like, are people just drawn too far to the polar opposites of each other?
Well, we'll find out, right? We're going to do the experiment in 2020. I think
do the Democrats have the?
Now, I'm pretty sure Trump gets reelected.
I would say so too.
So the question I asked my left-leaning friends, which is what I would call everybody, I asked him, what demographic voted for Trump who won't vote for him now? And I can't name one.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
can't think of a demographic that will turn on him.
Well, if the Democrats had the balls to put Tulsi in front, like I think about voting for
I've been
her.
supporting Tulsi I've been telling friends about Tulsi for about 4 years. They go, who? And I go, and this woman in Hawaii, you got to pay attention to.
Same. I have tweets from like 2016, like Tulsi, you should run for president.
Right,
Like,
Tulsi, and she's hotter than hot too. Oh my God, what a double win, right? What a double win. But no one knew who she was. But I'm going, this woman, and I realized the other day during a podcast, she must have already been running, because there's no way I would have spotted her if she wasn't projecting out there, right?
right.
But I told friends, Tulsi Gabbard, Hawaii, watch her. And then she did the Rogan podcast, and I think that launched her. I think Rogan can launch a career. And that's my dream one, by the way. If I get a Rogan podcast, no offense, Marty, you're not Joe Rogan. If I get a Rogan podcast, I then get on the boat with Frodo, head off with Elven chicks to good places. Right?
I would love to see you on Rogan.
It would be so much fun. And I've watched people say, you got to get calm, but it's just white noise to him. He's getting presidential candidates. There'd have to be something to shake the world. He follows me, so we're connected. It's a loose connection.
We can make this happen. He might listen to this podcast. You don't know.
Maybe. Joe, I want a goddamn podcast. And if you're listening, I'll do anything for it. I'll pay for my own travel.
Do you think the Democrats are going to self-sabotage again? Like, I feel like Tulsi is honestly the only...
Oh, yeah, I do think so. Yeah. They're not going to let Tulsi near anything. Andrew Yang, they're trying to stuff down now. Apparently, I didn't watch the debate, but I saw a bunch of polls that suggested he won. Yeah. And then the newscasters didn't even mention it, like they didn't mention Ron Paul in 2008. I was on Ron Paul's homepage of his website in 2008 as an endorser, right? Boss. That was cool. That was awesome. I got to have dinner with him one night, just by chance, not for being on his website. Just I was at a meeting, a investors meeting, investing conference I was speaking at, and he was the sort of the keynote speaker, and they sat me next to him at dinner, and he's such a sincere, soft-spoken, humble guy. I would have loved to have seen Ron Paul president. Oh my God, he would have been so good.
He got dicked over too. I mean, there's plenty of YouTube videos.
By everybody, they wouldn't mention him by name on Fox News. It was like Lord Voldemort, right? They totally screwed him.
Do you
Just
think
like Bernie, right?
Do you think the system's sustainable though? You feel like we're at the tail end of this form of this democracy?
The fourth turning thing going, right? Has that fourth turning feel?
Not only here, all over the world.
Yeah. So I finished my year in review, and I said I pointed out that there was a lot of violence. I said violence is trending. And I had mentioned that the central banks had opened the Overton window by claiming that their QE was normal. I said, you're opening the Overton window. It's not normal. Overton window is the window of possibility, right? I said the populace is opening the Overton window too now, and the violence is trending. And so I think, just like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, they come in waves. Something feels wrong to me. It's like I'm in a thunderstorm, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up.
I completely agree.
And my conclusions say, so I write about all the shit and I try to be funny. I'm snarky as shit. I'm irreverent. But I get to the conclusion and I go deep, dark. And there's no humor. And this is why I am so, so pessimistic. And not 140 pages of stuff that wasn't that. And then I get to the end and I just go bam, and I hit him with this freight train of darkness.
You think it'll wake people up?
Well, it wasn't by design. So I write the whole thing and then I write the conclusion last. And I got to the end, and because I had inadvertently sort of lizard-brained my way through social change, I got to the end and I realized that what my lizard brain had done is that it kept drawing me back to the questions about social change and the movements and the and things that are in the air. And so I realized the conclusion is that shit is happening. And I'm terrified of new corporate America. I'm a capitalist, right? But General Motors, U.S. Steel, General Electric, they were huge, powerful companies. I never felt like they controlled me. But now I feel like the corporate world controls me. So Facebook controls us. Google controls us. They don't just know everything, but we could easily reach a point where you're late on your health care payment and your car ceases to function because you owe them.
This is why we need Bitcoin.
I don't want that.
Neither do I. Neither do I. That's why I focus on Bitcoin.
If you jaywalk in China, the cameras pick you up by facial recognition, and by the time you step on the curb, you've had money deducted from your bank account.
Well, that's the beauty of Bitcoin. It's a push system. They can't pull it from your bank account, right?
Well, I'm with you. That's why I'm sympathetic to it. But God damn it, they're going to squeeze you hard.
Oh,
right?
I know.
So who's a cash economy, right? If you get audited and your spending habits don't match your IRS report, they're going to hammer you, right?
Yeah.
So the Bitcoiners, if they end up on the wrong end of the ugly stick, to have to beat sovereign states, that's a war, right? That's not just a skirmish.
Oh no, I know, but I think it's an imperative war that needs to be fought. We're heading into.
I'm totally with you.
We're heading into the digital age. We have a decision. We either have China's surveillance economy exported to the rest of the world, or we defend freedom in the digital age with tools like Bitcoin.
Well, the other problem we have is we are spending so much more than we are creating. The growth in our debt is 5% above the growth in our GDP. You can't grow debt 5% above GDP.
No,
any system. You're doomed.
Yeah, we're making shit too. We're producing shit.
Right. What is Twitter? What is Twitter, Facebook, Netflix, Google? What do they create? Amazon even is just it's a great company, but it's not U.S. Steel. It's not Standard Oil.
Yeah,
right?
Making little trinkets
So Amazon wealth aggregates. It doesn't create as much as it aggregates wealth, right?
Yeah, it's because
and the people got rich off Amazon. They think, well, that created wealth. No, it didn't. It aggregated it. You are now wealthier. Great, congratulations.
Yeah, well,
but they don't heat houses. They don't build houses. They don't feed you. They don't do the things that we have to get done. Now, Apple does, but I think Apple's RCA 1929. Apple went to replace Jobs, and they replaced him with Scully again. Right?
Apple's dead. They're not dead, obviously, but the post Steve Jobs Apple is not up to snuff, and I don't think
their products suck.
Dude, the keyboard. Sorry for calling you dude. The keyboard on the last MacBook.
Dude, I call people dude all day. I picked it up from John Elway. Actually. I know where I got it. He walked past a mean lineman one day, and the guy was looking snarly, and Elway says, "Hey, dude." Ever since that moment, I've been calling people dude. Everything sucks.
Yeah, well, is that because there's a misallocation of capital enabled by Fed policy? I would say yes.
Well, but even I'm just talking Apple, right? They went from the magnetic connect to now to a plug-in that's going to break your computer when your Labrador hits it.
Well,
you now need adapters.
Why is that? Because they're driven by the quarterly balance sheet, the quarterly numbers, right? They have extremely high time preference. That's another reason why I like Bitcoin, because it helps people refocus time preference, low versus high time preference.
Right.
Nobody wants to build beautiful things that take a while anymore. It's all plastic crap.
When the Berlin Wall fell, I had two thoughts almost back to back. So I had grown up my whole life thinking that wall was permanent. The sense of permanence, the Berlin Wall was it, right? The Cold War was permanent. I had grown up in the Cold War. And then the wall fell. So the first thought was, wow, just truly wow. I can't believe it. The second thought I had, though, very, very quickly was, who is going to control us now? There was these two forces that were incredibly balanced. And we couldn't go into the Middle East because we would cause World War III. And they couldn't go into the Middle East because they would cause World War III. So it's this stalemate on all these fronts. And all of a sudden, boom, the Soviet Union's gone. And I remember Rogoff claiming that we would save the Soviet Union with a Marshall Plan-like approach, right?
Fuck Ken Rogoff.
What Rogoff fail to understand is the reason the Marshall Plan was there was because of the Soviet Union. And we didn't have to help the Soviet Union because there was no Soviet Union to protect against.
So now he's just trying to push NERP on the world. He went from that bad idea to this one.
NERP, right? NERP, hang him like Mussolini. Yeah, you put a NERP on my ass. I'm voting for guillotine shit.
Right? It's
NERP is just insane.
All right, let's dive into that. Why do you think NERP's insane?
Well, you can't charge people to lend money, right? That's not the free market. There's not a shred of free market in that. You shouldn't. The free market would never even let you lend money for less than inflation, right? So the question is, well, how do you get NERP then? And the answer is because they jerry-rig the system by statute. You have to buy certain kinds of bonds, and if they make them go negative, then you got to buy those bonds, right? The various companies that by statute have to buy those, they buy them. And then I saw this great interview that sealed the deal by a guy named Mike Green, and he talked about why, for example, Argentinian 100-year bonds, which are the stupidest thing ever, right? I would rather have a payday loan operation lending to crack horse than buy Argentinian bonds. And they went up 75% last year. The capital gain on Argentinian 100-year bonds went up 70%. They will not go a decade without defaulting. So whoever's buying them, they're trading Pokemon cards.
They issued those bonds last year, didn't they?
Yeah.
And they've already defaulted.
Yeah. And treasury yields on Portugal and Hungary and Spain are below 10-year U.S. treasuries, right? These are nuts, right? The bond market is completely and utterly broken. The question is, how is this happening? Well, Mike Green points out that you have indexed market cap weighted index bond funds, just like market cap weighted index stock funds. So we know now, if you were paying attention, that the reason the FANGs have taken off like crazy is because the bigger the market cap, the more money gets dumped into them. And so you get this virtuous cycle up, which will eventually lead to a vicious cycle down, right? The reverse trip is exactly the same in reverse. But the bond funds are the same. That's the part I didn't understand. Such that as these bonds went to lower and lower interest rates, they got more and more of the money dumped into them because of the market cap of the bond. I can't remember the term. I keep forgetting this term. Whatever, the price of the bond goes up. So more money goes to buy that bond. So the stupider the bond, the more overvalued it becomes, the more money goes into it, right? This is not buy low, sell high stuff. And so what happens is that now once you cross zero, the algorithms go nuts.
Yeah, it's Einstein's.
Money flows into those bonds.
Did you read Howard Marks' letter a couple months ago?
I try to read everything Howard puts out. Depends which one.
Well, the one where he was talking about NERP and maybe Einstein was wrong that compounding interest is not the eighth wonder of the world.
I've made that argument forever. There's nothing exponential that's sustainable. A guy named Albert Bartlett at Berkeley has talked about our failure to understand the exponential function is a fundamental problem. Nothing can grow exponentially. So it's all very linear.
Yeah.
And so compound interest is not the greatest invention of all time. It's great while it's compounding, but then there'll be a reset. And what the average person doesn't understand is that over the 20th century, or over 150 years since the end of the 19th century, that stocks have returned about the same as the GDP.
Over time.
That makes sense. And it's a very low number. You inflation adjust, you take out fees, taxes, all that crap, you get about 3.5%, 4%. And that's what you used to get in the 17th century and in the 18th century. Those were sort of the rates you could get on bonds and stocks. And Ben Graham said, look, anyone who thinks they can make more on equities than on bonds in the long run is delusional.
So going back 150 years, do you think stuff was less volatile, prices more stable back then?
Well, we had a gold standard, so that helps. So you don't have to deconvolute inflation. You have to pull it out. there's something I post on Twitter that someone else posted to me just 2 days ago, I think it was, called the Chapwood Index.
Yeah, yes.
The Chapwood Index is kind of like a shadowstats.com inflation index where they look at 50 cities, they look at 500 items. This is a classic basket of goods. And the inflation rates in these 50 cities have been running at 10%, right? And I wouldn't have put it that high. But it sure as hell isn't JPO's stupid 1.7. That's moronic.
No, the CPI is, Rudy is a very big proponent of this. The CPI is a terrible metric. Number. Yeah.
And the other thing, here's one thing that I've seen no one talk about. I don't know why. I talk about it all the time for 10 years now. No one talks about the accelerated rate of depreciation of a good. And my favorite story, I broke a goddamn blender. It's one of those big ones, you drop it on your foot, you're going to the ER, right? Mm-hmm. And I dropped it and it shattered. And so I had to buy a new blender. That blender was at least 40 years old. The new blender lasted about 3 years. Call it 4. That means that there was a 10-fold inflation correction needed in terms of the cost per function. And that's never accounted for. It's never accounted for, right? The fact that your appliance lasts for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that's it. Never accounted for.
Similar to shrinkflation almost, in a different way.
It's similar to shrinkflation, but this one doesn't get accounted for. And so the fact that, when I was a kid, if I got a toy for Christmas, I played with it all year. The average toy for Christmas now is a life expectancy of about New Year's.
Yeah, well, this goes back to time preference and easy money leading to a misallocation of capital. It makes us build shitty products. People are going to have access to those loans. So they're going to
also because people can't afford the good stuff, so they buy the shitty stuff. And they don't realize they're in a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this vicious cycle, right? To keep up with inflation, the common man, if he is able to do so, is forced to do that via mutual funds, stocks, bonds, whatever.
Right.
Do you think
common man doesn't get that? But,
no, the common man couldn't afford a $400 emergency expense. But should we, in the digital, for humans, should we have to chase yield this way, or should we have a monetary good that just allows us to maintain purchasing power over time? At least maintain it, maybe grow that purchasing power.
Being hodlers, we agree on this one, right? This is, the idea that, so the central bankers who say inflation is too low, they're liars or morons or crooks. They're not being honest, right? They're not being honest to themselves. They know full well that inflation is a bad thing. Paul Volcker, before he died, said 2% is way too high, right?
Rest in peace.
The Federal Reserve Act says they have to have a stable currency. They didn't say a stable inflation rate. They said a stable currency, right? And the stable currency is zero. And many of us would argue, no, it's actually it's a deflation because of technological gain, right?
Yeah. No, it is, but that's what I think is aiding to this increase in violence and what's tearing at the social fabric, right?
People are mad. Left, right, doesn't matter. Everybody's mad.
But they blame politicians. Do you believe that the core of the problem is the Fed and not the politicians?
Well, it's certainly the Fed. Because part of it's because the Fed is the only ones who actually have the kind of centralized power to make a difference, right? So the Fed could hike rates when they have to be hiked and take the pain.
Volcker did. Nobody's done it since Volcker.
Did.
Yeah.
Don't forget, our national debt was peanuts compared to now. So Volcker had slack to work with. And Volcker also was looking at this inflationary effect that was just huge. And it wasn't just inflation of 10%, which we just talked about, but it was the expectations of a huge inflation too. So I remember that period. It was painful. It was painful, that kind of inflation. Volcker realized that even if his job is to take care of banks, he had to deal with this inflation.
Yeah.
It was not so self-sacrificing as much as just that's what history was calling upon him to do.
Yeah, there was long gas lines and stuff like that going on, right?
But Powell's cowardly. People thought he was tough. He's cowardly. Actually, someone said, Druckenmiller the other day, I watched an interview, and he said Powell's like yelling, but not as good. And I'm going, oh my God. My head just exploded. Right?
Well, I sort of feel for them though. There's like they're just forced to keep the charade alive at this point.
You're too generous. I don't.
No, do you think
their job is to not screw this up?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Their job is to, it's like feeling bad for the general who couldn't make the call on dropping guys on Omaha Beach, right?
Yeah.
He can't be the general if he can't look and say, look, we're going to lose a ton of guys. This is going to be ghastly.
Yes.
But we have to do this, right? And I'm not sure we did, right? You can debate that, but if you realize that you got to put guys on Omaha Beach, you can't recoil from it because it's going to be ugly.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. It's a very good point.
Right? That's what leaders are, right? They say opportunity makes leaders. It does not. Opportunity reveals leaders.
It feels like we don't have very many good leaders today.
Well, certainly not inside the Beltway.
No, definitely not inside the Beltway.
I never thought I'd reach a point. I was never a big Obama detractor. I was so impressed with his ability to be at the mic. He's better than Clinton, in my opinion. And he wasn't appalling, in my opinion. He bombed too many countries for my taste, especially for a liberal. I think a liberal should not be bombing countries, right? If the neocons are country bombers, the liberals should not be. But he bombed the hell out of everybody. That wasn't good. But I never thought I'd reach a point where I'd say, holy shit, I'd take Obama back right now. Right? He looks awfully good compared to the loonies that we're looking at now.
Well,
By the way, the people have to pay attention to the modern monetary theory, right? That shit is coming. And it's just bad news. It is Marxism wrapped up in garbage, right? It's 3-week-old sushi. It's just bad.
Why is it such a hot topic now? It's like Parker, the dude we were talking about earlier, talked about it's two bastardized theories put together for like a completely brain dead bastardized theory. It doesn't even make sense.
I wrote about it. Got 12 pages on modern monetary theory where I've tried to put it together. And it turns out the modern monetary theorists did the heavy lifting for me. They wrote a manifesto this year, in which by just reading the manifesto, you go, oh my God, now I get it. They're scary, right? Their own manifesto traumatizes the reader.
Is it about the Green New Deal?
Oh, that's a part of it, but that's a small part of it. They think
$9 trillion is a small part of it?
Well, that's a big number, but it's a small part of their platform. They think that government committees ought to decide what industries to influence. They think they ought to use monetary policy to decide how to emphasize one industry over the other. They think that you can keep printing money, that you should just pay for it by printing.
They're setting up the cognitive hubs. They're going to spatially redistribute us.
And they say that. Let me think of the other things they say. They say that that monetary policy is their distinct issue is they have to deal with the fact that people are some people are too wealthy, right? And so monetary policy is in charge of that. So they think that they're in charge of deciding how quick to burn the economy and stuff like that. It's like there's no room in their theory for free markets. They think that you should the government should hire people to do stuff when the economy's not running at full throttle. So they want to build bridges to nowhere and crap like that and big digs and stuff with workers. And then they talk about how when the economy's running well, the phrase was disemploy people and let the free market take over. And I'm going, so you're going to stop the big dig? You're going to stop the bridge to nowhere, and you're going to build them with temp workers or something. What are you talking about? They have no idea how to handle inflation. They think they're in charge of directing money to solve the climate problem.
Well,
I mean, this is really spooky stuff. These people need CAT scans. They're nuts.
Yeah, well, it's individuals who think they can micromanage very complex systems, emergent systems. Like how is this not like known that these systems are complex and should be emergent?
Tell me, no one can give me an example of a single thing that didn't evolve, right? That didn't evolve through trial and error, culling the herds, throwing out the failures, keeping the winners, right? I don't care if it's the microchip, an organism, I don't care what it is. They evolve. You have to have a Darwinian selection to make a complex system. And they want to take that out. As does the Federal Reserve. So their best argument is the Fed and the current system are run by idiots. And I go, yes, we agree on that part.
100% agree. How do we wrest control from these idiots? Who was it? Hike said, we'll never have control of our money till we wrest it from the whole hands of the government. Gold, I would argue, is in the hands of the government via the vaults in the 6102 Act, Executive Order 6102. Bitcoin.
But you can own your own.
Bitcoin may be that sly roundabout way to take control of the money.
If we need Bitcoin or gold, both will do fine. That's my guess. My guess is Bitcoin and gold are joined at the hip in terms of the future. I think gold is sort of like a treasury bond, where Bitcoin is more of a more speculative protection mechanism, right? So higher risk, higher reward.
I like that. Right. Description.
Right. And I'm just going with the treasury.
Yeah. Well, Dave, thank you for all that you do. It's been an incredible hour and a half. We just blew through 90 minutes pretty quickly. Or in 90 minutes, but it felt fast.
I like ranting. I like ranting. To have someone to rant back and forth with, and I get it off my chest.
I can tell. Well, we have plenty more time to rant if you have anything else on your mind that you think needs to be ranted on.
Well, so my year in review gets uploaded tonight. This is Friday the 20th, in case I don't know when this is loaded. The evening of Friday the 20th, part 1. The most entertaining part might be the Epstein part. I paid pretty close attention to Epstein.
All right, let's dive into
it. And one of the problems the Epstein story presents is that it's part of a continuing stream of independent sets of rules for powerful people and unpowerful. So, for example, I was going to write a ton about Jussie Smollett. The Epstein story sucked the oxygen right out of the room on that. So I make brief mention of it, right? Mm-hmm. But Michelle Obama calls someone in Chicago, next thing you know, he walks, right? That's how the system works. So that struck me as an important story. But then Epstein, right? Here's what I'll say to your readers, listeners. The Epstein story, in my opinion, is the biggest scandal in U.S. history. And they are furiously trying to put it away because they want to keep the story simplified to he was a perv, he had friends who were pervs, let's move on, right? That's what they're trying to do. It is a web of thousands of people that goes back decades, and doing things and controlling the world in a way. So it really is, it really dwarfs things like Kennedy assassinations, in my opinion, stuff like that. I think it dwarfs it.
I do as well. I mean, it was so fucking blatantly obvious what was happening. I mean,
well, there's a non-obvious part. I think there's a more than 50% chance he's not dead.
I mean, you believe that, or you believe there's a possibility? Yeah.
Not just possibility. I put it. If I had to bet a paycheck right now, I would bet he's not dead. And here's the simple argument. I have an argument for why we'll never travel in time too, so don't underestimate. Epstein had been doing, he was a Mossad intelligence agent for 40 years, right? His whole life, his whole adult life, he's been in intelligence. He's been setting up honey traps. He's been, running a bed and brothel and breakfast. And he's been, they say he was blackmailing people. I don't think that's the accurate description. I actually think he was luring people into this twisted world. And of course, he then owned them. But he then they were offered power and wealth and young girls, right? This is not blackmail. This is something altogether different. So Epstein had dirt that could bring down unbelievable people.
King Andrew.
He's sitting in jail.
Or Prince Andrew.
He's sitting in jail, and a guy with 40 years of experience, is he not going to say, if I don't get out of here alive and in one piece, I'm going to release the hounds? That's what Snowden did. Daniel Ellsberg's Pentagon Papers, he released it to multiple news sources so they couldn't suppress it, right? And so Epstein, knowing the risk he was in, he kept getting, convicted of stuff and then getting let off on easy things and sealed court cases. And the whole mess shows that he knew how to play the game. So you couldn't safely kill Epstein at all. There's no way you could just whack him, because he'd have a suicide. It's called a suicide switch.
A dead man switch.
Dead man switch, yeah. And so he was untouchable. In fact, the biggest risk was someone who wanted this to happen killing him, right? That was the biggest risk, in my opinion. And, you know, his Bimbet partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, who I give the nickname to Jizz, I was very proud of that. Her father was the most famous Israeli spy of all time, right? I mean, this is a wildly connected world. Epstein traces back to Roy Cohn. They trace back to Meyer Lansky in the 1920s, right? There's an amazing story here. And so he's on some beach with a facial reconstruction, getting rub and tugs from Jizz.
Jesus.
And so it's witness protection, right?
Yeah.
But the punchline, I know who the dead body on the gurney was.
Who was it?
You really want to know now, or do you want your readers to? So if you read this thing, it turns out social media tore this apart fast. There was a picture of Epstein on the gurney. Of course, have you ever seen a dead body on a gurney on the news? No. But this one made it to the news, right? So that right there is sort of odd. But if you look at the guy's face on the gurney, the profile, look at Epstein. They're not the same guy. The ear's wrong. The whole ear construction, all this cartilage and shit, totally different shape. The nose on the guy in the gurney's got a distinct sort of bend to it. Epstein's a straight edge. So the nose is all wrong. And so the question is, who's the guy on the gurney? Well, just so happens, and I put no probability on this theory, none whatsoever, but it's the funniest conspiracy theory of all time, the funniest. 3 weeks before that, a guy who looks like Epstein died. And you look at him and you go, that nose looks right to me. That ear could pass for right. He died. The media said unknown cause. It was announced. A number of articles were written. Said he was deeply embedded up the shenanigans and Eastern Bloc crap, usual dark world. The guy who died, and as I put it, I was so proud of this one. I said he wouldn't even be freezer burnt yet, right? 3 weeks earlier. But then I realized if you recognize the similarities, you whack them and you need the carcass. You take the photo of the gurney 3 weeks back, right? So you wouldn't have to put them in deep freeze for 3 weeks. You just take the photo. And there's all parts of the story that fall apart. But the guy on the gurney, the guy in the Mets hat at a baseball game you're looking at and you're going, this guy died, not question. There's no doubt he died 3 weeks early. There's no doubt you go, that could be an Epstein clone right there. He's pretty good. He looks like the guy on the gurney. Wait for it, Hillary's brother.
No.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What?
Hillary's brother. Hillary's brother, Tony Rodham. And I give an A+ to the spooks charged with getting a carcass and saying Hillary's brother's a candidate. And he gets whacked 3 weeks earlier, no cause of death given. And they put his ass on the gurney. They take a photo. And I think the other message is maybe that social media actually picked up on this and they said that maybe it's a message to Hillary. Epstein ain't dead either, bitch, right? I don't know.
Wait.
But he did die. They did not announce cause of death. There was a few news stories, and that's it.
Wait, so Hillary's brother did die?
He absolutely died, yes. Major press stories, credible press stories. Not that there's such a thing anymore, but they were there. And no cause of death. Every article said no cause of death given. Hillary announced it, right? That her brother died and blah, 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 blah. And then 3 weeks later, a guy in a gurney looks like her brother posing as Epstein.
Damn.
I'll send you a copy of my year in review by email.
It's fucked up because it's not hard to believe that.
I know. and the idea that the spooks could get him out of prison, Jesus, if they can't do shit like that, right? The guards fell asleep and they were overworked.
The fact that the camera went out, the camera went out.
There was no footage showing anyone going in, and then there's footage that's now disappeared again. I mean, they've been revising this plot on a daily basis, and they're trying to put it away. They don't care if Prince Andrew looks like a perv. They don't care if Clinton looks like a perv. Like, that's a tough sell. They care if we find out that the Israeli Mossad is infiltrated all of Silicon Valley. They care if we find out that there's a network of pervs, including maybe hundreds, if not thousands of people globally. They care if everyone is all connected in this twisted web of connectivity. They don't want that shit. They want it to be Epstein's a perv, his girlfriend's a perv. He was rich. No one knows how he got rich. There's no evidence that they know how he got rich, right? The whole thing smells from top to bottom. The connection of Epstein to the intelligence agencies is, I think, unambiguous. The ambiguous part is what that end game was.
Right.
And I don't think you could kill him. I do not think you could kill him.
Because he'd probably definitely have a dead man switch, right?
I'll tell you, that's what I do.
Right.
My holy crap, right? How could he be so stupid as to not do that?
Well, but it's like everybody knows it's bullshit and that.
Well, what, you remember who the coroner was, right? Michael Baden?
Yeah, who else did he do in the past? He
did JFK. Michael Baden did JFK. He was a young punk. He did JFK, and then he testified for OJ, and then he oh my God, he was the coroner of the stars. He's 86 years old, and they bring him in to do the autopsy. And you say, well, he was strangled, broke his hyoid bone. They don't care if the world thinks he got murdered. That's not relevant either. Right. Because they say, yeah, he had lots of powerful friends. He was a risk. Someone had him whacked. That doesn't shock us, right? This is the Clinton body count is everywhere, right? All the memes on Twitter about Hillary in a guard's outfit, Bill in guard's outfit, that just went wild. There's no news in that. There's nothing new. But here's the deal. Not one of his accomplices, not one of the pervs that, there's transcripts that have been released of the civil cases. I've read them. They're original screen grabs in which the victim is saying, this person, naming names, I'm not going to name because they have law degrees, this person raped me. Why are they not being interrogated? Right? Where is Jiz Maxwell? Why is she not being interrogated? Why did they not raid his island for months until he killed himself? Why have we heard nothing about what was at the island? Right?
Right. We had to get Luke butcher his last name, Rudolphski, to go to the pedo island with his camera by himself.
Yeah, well, there have been some, but the place is so there's a police video from 2005, I think it is, where they obviously, it's by protocol, they walk through Epstein's house and they just film everything after he got arrested. And there's sort of mildly erotic art everywhere. And what's really noticeable is there's just bedroom after bedroom after bedroom. And every bedroom has an attached bathroom, right? So they're all like master bedroom sort of combos. The houses I see, you got a master bedroom, and then the kids all share shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing you notice is there's stacks of towels, there's toiletries, none of it being used. There's no toothbrush laying on the side of the sink. Bedroom after bedroom, it's pristine. You realize you're not looking at a house. There's no, it's not a snapshot of a human existence. There's no, dishes in the sink. There's no stack of papers. It is a bed and breakfast, or what I call a brothel and breakfast.
Yeah, it's a cat house.
So he's running this operation out of his house. And in his connection with Roy Cohn was a massively evil hitman for political means. He was a kingmaker. And he was the lawyer to Studio 54 where all the hedonistic shit took place.
Yeah, what was going on at Studio 54?
Well, I don't know. I don't even know if it exists now, but back then it's where everyone was doing all sorts of stuff that you and I wish we could do. So Collum was a badass, and he had ties to Rupert Murdoch and to Reagan, and he made and broke careers. He was tied to Collum was tied pictorially. You can even see it. He was tied to McCarthy. He was tied to J. Edgar Hoover. He was tied to mobsters. Cohn was Jeffrey Epstein, but here's where Epstein differed from Cohn. Epstein was sort of, I think, pathetic. So what they had was a guy who could do all the pervy shit, but he wasn't a kingmaker. right? He's like the drug dealer who consumed his own product too much. So he got so wound up in all the bimbos that he just wanted to go around and do the shit that he was helping other people do.
Yeah.
You know, everyone, the left, for example, is shaking off the fact that Clinton was all over the logs, right?
Right.
And how do you forgive him for that, right? Why are you not saying, holy shit?
Well, Trump was even on the logs too.
Yeah, I know, but he wasn't on the plane, I don't think.
Oh, no.
And actually, in the original transcripts, there were some footage where they were asking about Trump, and the woman said, "No, I never saw him," but she had seen Clinton, she had seen Prince Andrew. She right that. I have this funny line. Sometimes I write shit. I go, "Oh, I'm proud of that." Where I imitated Fantasy Island, and I had and tattoo says, "Boss, deplane." And then Ricardo Montalban says, "Unshackle the girls." and so the Epstein story to me is just humongous because it's been put away. Barbara Walters, Access journalists, never called anyone out on this stuff because you know what they all share? They all want to be elite, powerful, connected.
Well, that's actually right. Well, I think
what's that?
I was actually very happy to see Project Veritas get that
Yes.
that hot mic.
Yes, they usually overplay it, but that was a good hot micer, that one. And she said we had everything. I'm going, no, you didn't. You had a small fraction of the story, right? They didn't have everything. And by the way, that has not been released even now. Right?
What do you mean?
So now the story's relevant. Where is it? Right? It's gone. By the way, the Epstein connects with Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein connects with Mossad. I mean, this is an extraordinary. So I think it's a web. Here's the question: a normal guy. Your wife's not watching, right? Normal guy. We all like to think we're benevolent, but what most of us have never faced is not only some hot chick hitting on you. You're married and some hot chick hitting on you because you put out the message, hey, I'm not available. You shake it off, you move on, and nothing happens. But what we've never faced is one where a hot chick's hitting on you and her fucking job is to get you. So if some chick who could, stop traffic is banging on you and her job is to catch you, that's when you find out what you're made of, right? And then the question is, can you slowly but surely suck guys into this world? So you suck them into that, and they say, oh, yeah, I can get you an 18-year-old. Next thing you know, you're doing 16-year-olds. But you think your shit doesn't stink. You think you're so powerful, and all these people around you, right? And then the question is, how hard would it be to get these guys to go all hedonistic? And I don't think it would be that hard.
It's
if that was your goal.
It's a process.
It's a
little
process.
bit at a time.
And you justify it by saying, I'm untouchable. And remember back when Dominique Strauss-Kahn got booted out of what is the IMF, I think?
Mm-hmm.
They took him out with a honey trap. They had a chick accuse him of raping her. And he'd been banging chicks for years. But when it was time for him to go, and I think Lagarde replaced him, they took him out. They just took him out. They just had her accuse him, and out he went, right? Yeah. That's how they do it. Roger Stone took out Gary Hart. That monkey business photo where Gary Hart was with the chick sitting on his lap in a boat called Monkey Business, and then that leaked, and next thing you know, he's not running for president anymore. Roger Stone set that up. Who's the former prosecutor? I keep forgetting his name. Gaunt face. He's very ambitious. Then he got taken out by some prostitutes.
Here in New York.
Yeah, Southern District.
Yeah, it's Spitzer, not Spitzer.
Elliot Spitzer. Yeah. He got taken up by Stone and Manafort. Those were just hits.
Yeah.
Those are honey traps. That's the world they're in. Why these guys are so deluded is to not recognize that they're being set up. There's a guy, Peter Dale Scott, who studied drug cartels, Berkeley professor, studied drug cartels, and very quickly realized the drug cartels were not the story. Intelligence agencies were the story. I thought the drug cartels bought our politicians and said, look, we'll give you money or we'll bury your kids alive in your backyard. You make the choice. No. We decide which of these drug cartels gets to survive. Just like in Afghanistan, right? You're our warlord. You go ahead and sell your poppies, but you work for us now. And if you don't, we'll kill you. And when Noriega went off the reservation, we went and got him. We had to go get him. He was irrelevant, but we couldn't let anyone else who was on payroll show that they can walk. So it's leaving the mob, right? You're a made man at that point. And so Peter Dale Scott wrote about the drug cartels, but he talks about this idea of this deep state. He called it deep politics, but that's where the origin, I think he might be the origin of the concept of the deep state. And about how once in a while the window opens and we get a quick glimpse. You go, what was that? So a Kennedy assassination, for example, quick glimpse. I'm a truther, it turns out. I look at the physics. I don't need politics for that. I look at the physics. I go, not a chance. My dad built buildings for a living. He didn't buy it. He built buildings for a living. He didn't buy it. He had an expertise in fireproofing. He didn't buy it. And so I did a poll on Twitter. I got about 5,000 answers. 65% were truthers. Right? There's a lot of people who don't buy the story. It's a matter of degree, though. Right?
I don't buy that story at all.
Do you believe they did this? I don't know. Do you believe they did that? Maybe, right? So it's degree. But there's components of 9/11 that are just dead wrong. I mean, start trivially. They found Mohammed Atta's license in the wreckage the next day, 100 million tons of whatever, and they find his license from the ball of flames, right? So they start lying immediately. They ship the Saudis offshore immediately, right? So right away, the whole thing's fucked up.
Building 7 alone.
Right, that doesn't mean that it was an inside job, but there are certain things about the inside job of 9/11 which are so problematic and so against the laws of physics that I go, it's not legit. And there's some great truther documentaries where they interview dozens of aeronautical engineers saying that plane would have ripped apart. You can't do that, right? And pilots saying there's no chance I could fly that flight path, right? No chance I could fly that flight path. The official flight path going into the Pentagon was impossible for a person to fly manually. And so there's and actually Chris Irons at QTR, I've been watching this for years when a physicist sent me the Building 7 video, and I said, holy shit, that's all wrong. But Chris Irons sent me a couple of these documentaries, and they were just great. We go, these are parts of the story I hadn't even seen.
Like
so I happily bet a paycheck 9/11's a screw up, a serious.
Yeah,
I think Pearl Harbor was a total screw up. I think Lusitania, right? I think we get into wars by false flags. Lusitania was loaded with armaments. It wasn't a civilian ship. Yeah. Pearl Harbor, there are memos from admirals saying, do not put our fleet in Pearl Harbor. They're indefensible. They did anyways. And they didn't even have guard towers. They needed to get us into a war, and we needed to sign off, and so they needed Japan to bomb the shit out of us. There's memos, guys, saying we're going to get attacked within a week. Right? This is just how governments do it now.
Yeah. No, with 9/11 in particular, I mean, I don't think it was an inside job by the U.S. government, but there's some fuckery. I mean, the passport, Building 7, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
Wrong. The Pentagon's wrong. There's not a shred of footage of the plane hitting the Pentagon. Nothing credible. How do you fly into Washington, D.C. with 45 minutes notice and no one catch it on a camcorder? Right? Not possible. Not possible. Right? And by the way, I mentioned the flight path. That plane did a 270 to hit the Pentagon. That's the official story. At 540 knots. It turns out the aeronautical engineers say you fly 540 knots at sea level, the plane is getting shredded. Those planes are spec'd to fly fast at 35,000 feet where there's no atmosphere. They don't fly 540 knots at sea level.
No.
And the pilot said, I couldn't do that 270 if you paid me. There's just no way. Right? So there's a lot of parts of the story that just keep failing to add up. And, there's a lot of spaghetti that sticks to the wall, kind of. And you go, well, if that was the story, I'd say forget it. But Building 7 never should have. No chance should Building 7 have. No chance.
No. Well, started a war. We're still in it.
We're still in it. And you know what the Middle East is about? It's not about oil. It's about war. The industrial military complex, the trillions of dollars being spent in the Middle East is about war, not about oil. We can buy their oil.
We
don't
make our
even
own.
own the oil anymore. That's not Exxon's oil anymore. That's Aramco's. It's about war. It's about building jets and selling them to Saudi Arabia to then bomb Yemen and pretending. By the way, last year I wrote about Syria's chlorine gas attacks and how they were all wrong. They were torn apart by social media. They made no sense. I wrote about it. Just in the last 2 months, there have been articles coming out saying those were fake. And I'm going, really? It took you a year to figure that out? Right? The Skripal poisoning I wrote about, the Skripal poisoning hung on the Russians. That was a farcical story. I'm an organic chemist. The drugs, the compounds they supposedly were Russian-derived could be made in a standard sophomore organic chemistry laboratory. That simple. They're so simple that you can literally take the 4 key ingredients, pour them together in a bucket, and you'd have a toxic brew. Even if you didn't take any care to do it right, you'd have a toxic brew that could kill people. That's how simple they are. I put them on my final exam in a course I taught. I told the story about how I got into an international incident, and then I put one of the Novichok nerve agents on the exam and said, how would you make this? Let me give you a hint. It'll take 3 steps total. 100% credit in the entire class with one kid who screwed it up. So apparently he can't be a terrorist.
Right.
But they're trivial. And then they said, oh, these have to be the Russians. They were lying. I ended up all over RT. I had Al Jazeera calling me, right? Because I spoke out and said that they're lying. Maybe the Russians did it, but what they're saying is a lie.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Syrian gas thing in particular, when John Kerry was trying to get us into that.
Right. It was a total farce.
Well, but it also, that instance in particular gave me a lot of confidence in the power of Twitter, because I honestly think Twitter helped us not bomb Syria after that. And the conversation.
Right.
I
think that's exactly right. So what happened is the story fell apart too fast, and so they couldn't justify it. Right. If we had Twitter, when they were trying to sell us the Iraq War, I bet we could have stopped it.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Twitter would have torn the story apart.
Do you think that these communication channels now provide an opportunity for peace in the future? Are we going to give peace a chance?
Well, I write about that too. Social media, digital world is either going to save democracy or cause the demise of democracy. I don't know which way it's going yet.
Yeah.
Because they can send propaganda across it just as much as we can debunk it. And what bothers the hell out of me, and I mentioned 2 names of people, Gavin McInnes, who I think unfairly got hung out as basically a neo-Nazi. He's not even close. The other guy who was hated by the left was Milo Yiannopoulos, right? Mm-hmm. And I understood why people hated him. I mean, he was very polarizing. They've rubbed him out. He's gone.
Actually,
they've taken him off all the digital world. They've scrubbed him. He's been erased.
He actually just did a very good podcast with Ari Shafir talking about the concept of trolling. Highly recommend you go check it out. I don't care what you think about
what
Milo.
Is it? What's the name?
Ari Shafir. He's a comedian. He's actually good friends with Rogan. ARISHAFIR. But he had Milo on about a month ago, basically explaining Milo's mentality of why he trolls, and it's to get at truths. That's what trolling is about at the end of the day. It's to get at hard truths.
Right. And I understand why people hate him, but I don't understand why, in any way, shape, or form, it's good news that he could be scrubbed.
Right.
There's great guys like Tim Pool. Here's a guy started out super left, and now you listen to him, and boy, he just hates the left. Tim Pool is this guy who, at best I can tell, has no credentials. All he has is the head on his shoulders.
Yeah, no,
and
Tim's
does a wonderful job of tearing apart these ises.
No, Tim's incredible. I've been following him for a while. Actually, trying to get him on the podcast too.
Yes, you should. He's so smart. I mean, the smartest guy I ever met was a 3rd grade educated bean picker. Brains and education should not be confused.
No, especially in today's education system.
Really? You think menstrual studies is not appropriate. I have a whole section on thoughts on college too, where I basically try to say, quit wasting your money on stupid stuff. I think college is a good thing, but if the kid wastes it, if you're taking a 4 credit hour course on menstrual studies, you're dropping $8,000.
Right.
Like $8,000 to study menstruation, right? Your kid better find a cheaper way to find themselves, right?
No, I mean, you could teach yourself anything online. I'm a big proponent of, in college, I had a lot of professors who I couldn't
also
understand.
think we're moving towards a system where credentials are going to be less emphasized.
Oh, definitely, 100%.
We're getting to the point where it's going to come down to your skills, not your credentials.
I think we're already there, especially in the world of software development.
Oh, my God, yes, yeah. I mean, Edward Snowden, I don't think was highly educated, right?
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, software development's very emergent. Like you just learn by tinkering with it, and you get good at it over time. You can't be taught.
So I'm told.
Yeah.
I think I'm the only guy in the known universe who took a graduate level physics course without any calculus. So in any case, it's been fun.
It's been great. Well, I can't wait to read your end of year review, even though we just talked about a lot of it.
Tonight, as long as these guys, their family issues don't delay it. I like to release it on Friday evenings pre-Christmas. That's the kind of, there's always one Friday go, okay, that's the target Friday right there.
Yeah. Well, whenever it comes out, I'm going to be reading it very quickly. How are your thoughts of Bitcoin after this conversation, even though it wasn't really the focus?
Well, they haven't changed so much, except for because I've had conversations like this, but I'm not going into it. In part because of this, I don't want the risk reward combo, right? I'm happy to dial it back with my gold risk reward, and I do believe that if you win, I win too, and so I don't worry about that. I do think the big worry is how Bitcoin sustains itself against the state. I think that's and I can think of all sorts of ways they can try to squash you, and then the question will be, can they squash you? And it seems to me, again, I keep coming back to, it has to be sustainable as a not really mainstream currency, because I think they can make mainstream not work. I think the sovereign state can make people not willing to use it to buy a pizza.
No, Bitcoin is street money. It is black market money.
Right. And it has to be able to survive as that kind of currency. And if it can do that, his name was McCullough from Russia. He said it can. His opinion was it can. He says it doesn't have to go mainstream to survive. There's going to be some bumps in the road, right?
Oh, there already have been many bumps.
Yeah, I know. The sell-offs are impressive, right? They really look death-defying. There's no stock or something that does that and then bounces, right? Those are usually the gurgling noises coming out of a dead company that do that.
Yeah, you get used to them after a while.
Yeah, it helps to be up. So I was buying gold between 270 and 290, and so when it went from 1900 to 1200 ish. It's not that it didn't hurt, but it sure as hell takes the pain out when you're still up by a factor of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, over the last 20 years, gold has beat the S&P by 2% annualized.
Something to think about, freaks.
Cackle at the gold bugs at your own peril. We've beat your asses for 20 years. And that's when I started buying it. So you can bite me if you don't like gold.
Well, I won't be biting you because I do like gold. I also like Bitcoin, and I like you as well, Dave. And I really appreciate you taking.
Thank you.
Now we're at 2 hours and 5 minutes. I really appreciate it.
It was fun. I hope your audience got their money's worth.
Oh, they're definitely. I'm very interested to hear their reactions to this episode.
How many people click? What's your typical click count?
We'll get around like 10,000 downloads here.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Nothing too crazy.
I have no idea what the click count on my year in review is. I have no idea what it is. I've never gotten a hard number. I should ask the Peak Prosperity guys. What kind of? The other thing, it comes in 2 parts, and what I really want to know is what's the click count in part 2? Is there a huge drop off where people read part 1 and go, I just can't read part 2 now, right?
Do people follow up?
yeah, do people follow all the way? But I get hundreds and hundreds of emails after I write this thing. So I think, it keeps inspiring me to do it, but it's so cathartic. It is cathartic, like passing a kidney stone cathartic. I reach a point where I have over 100 pages of poorly written, poorly edited, unfunny, raw stuff, no graphics. It's just awful. It's just a pile of prose. And I look at it and I go, this is just crap. But I've written enough papers in my career to know that, yes, but crap can be edited out of crapness, right? So,
yes, no.
And I eventually get it there. And I'm pretty happy with it. It's different this year.
Yeah, you're speaking to somebody who writes a daily newsletter and never edits it.
Oh, my God. You have my sympathy.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's worth it, though.
You gotta face it. William Buckley was asked, how do you write three op-eds a week? And he says, I just have to think of 3 things that piss me off every week. And I'm thinking, oh boy, that sounds easy, actually.
Yeah, the bent is a daily rant. That's what people call it.
And someone else said, the trick is to be able to say the same thing 100 times and make people think it's different.
That is true as well.
Okay, let's call it. Let's do it.
Let's end it. We're out.
Had fun.
That was a lot of fun. I might freak you out with this ending here. Peace and love, freaks.
No, you can't. Nothing freaks me out. Nothing. I think it freaks me out. Somebody likes Hillary.